From sci-fi sidekicks to cowboys on the move, these iconic film characters lost their lives while the cameras weren't there to catch it. The death of Chadwick Boseman of complications from colon cancer was as shocking as it was devastating. Not only was the actor just 43 years old at the time of his passing, but his diagnosis wasn't revealed to the public until he was already gone. Those who knew Boseman best said that, in addition to simply being a private person, it was his nature to worry about others before himself. And the last thing he would have wanted was to have people feel sorry for him. With pre-production for a second solo Black Panther movie already underway at the time of Boseman's death, questions about how to proceed without him immediately started to arise. Recasting him was ruled out almost immediately, as was having him come back in CGI form. Instead, it was decided that King T'Challa would also pass away in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Your brother is with the ancestors.
T'Challa ultimately loses his battle with an unspecified illness, setting the stage for his sister Shuri to become the MCU's new Black Panther. The on-screen funeral in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever is a touching tribute to both the actor and his most famous character. Comedian George Carlin spent much of his career almost constantly doing stand-up tours, leaving little time for anything else, especially acting. But he did make space in his busy schedule for a few film appearances over the years, the most famous of which is his role as the time-traveling guide Rufus in the first two Bill and Ted movies. The third installment in the series gestated for a long time before it finally went into production, but Carlin had already died by the time any serious talks of making the threequel were underway. That said, it wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion that we wouldn't see Rufus again in Bill and Ted Face the Music. The last few years have seen several departed actors virtually resurrected to reprise roles as famous characters. And for a time, a CG George Carlin was indeed considered for Face the Music. That was ultimately scrapped partially due to limited time and budget, but archival footage of Carlin, dubbed over with the sound-alike, was used so Rufus could make one final cameo. It's just a hologram of Rufus at a museum, and the real Rufus died a few years prior to the point in time that Bill and Ted are visiting. But it's a sweet moment nonetheless.
Be excellent to each other.
Party on, dude.
After all the bombastic action and the climax of The Matrix wraps up, the only surviving crew members of the Nebuchadnezzar are Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity. And Tank. Remember Tank, played by Marcus Chong? Tank is the operator of the Heroes' hovercraft in the first movie, and he heroically saves Neo and Trinity's lives by killing their former ally Cypher. If it wasn't for Tank, there would be no Matrix Reloaded or Matrix Revolutions. But the character did not survive to see the sequels. Tank apparently died during an unseen mission prior to The Matrix Reloaded. The specifics of his death are never mentioned outright, but some fans speculate that he succumbed to the lightning rifle wound he received during Cypher's failed mutiny. Tank was replaced with an operator named Link, who was apparently his brother-in-law. Rumor has it that Chong was originally set to appear in the Matrix sequels, but he demanded a much higher salary than the one outlined in his contract. After Chong was let go, he didn't take it well. He claimed to have crashed press junkets, stolen food from production offices, and crank-called the Wachowskis. He also accused the sibling directors of calling him a terrorist, and straight up sued them for going back on a promise to let him appear in the sequels. Not every off-screen death comes as a result of problem actors or tragic losses. Sometimes it's just a perfect storm of poor choices. No off-screen death is a better example of this frustrating phenomenon than that of Scott Summers, the hero more commonly known as Cyclops, in X-Men: The Last Stand. After returning to the final resting place of his late fiancée Jean Grey, Summers is astonished to find her alive, well, and rising from the water. The two embrace and share a kiss, at which point Scott's skin starts to ripple and his eyes pop open in fear. It turns out that this isn't really Jean Grey, at least not the one Scott knew and loved. To make a long story short, her presumed death during the events of X2 leads to the awakening of her alternate personality, the Phoenix. Phoenix assumes control of Jean's body, killing Cyclops and becoming a general nuisance for the rest of the film. That's all well and good, but it would have been nice to actually see what goes down at Alkali Lake. All we get is a shot of the other X-Men finding the Cyclops shades near an unconscious Jean. You could say that the Phoenix got away scot-free. How do you soften up a guy who gets paid to pummel other men into mincemeat? Give him a quirky and endearing love interest, that's how. It's hard not to fall in love with the mousy pet shop worker Adrian in the Rocky movies, played by Talia Shire. Arguably the heart and soul of the franchise, Adrian was never afraid to speak up when her meathead husband would set himself up to get eviscerated. Like when he challenged the 6.5-foot tall Ivan Drago to a match. Regardless of Rocky's poor decision-making though, Adrian was loyal to Rocky until the very end.
I'm with you no matter what.
No matter what.
Unfortunately, thanks to an off-screen death between Rocky V and Rocky Balboa, we're not exactly sure when that end was. The sixth film picks up with Rocky living on his own, with Adrian apparently long dead. At least she gets an Italian restaurant named after her. With Rocky Balboa seeing the iconic fighter as a tired, weathered shadow of his former self, it's Adrian's absence that gives Sylvester Stallone's performance real dramatic weight. Stallone claims he wanted to cut out Rocky's heart by taking Adrian from him, and that's exactly what he did. After spending almost 2 entire films being endlessly knocked down by life, things seem to be looking up for Dante Hicks at the end of Clerks II. Chief among the reasons why he can be excited for his future is that he's finally realized his current fiancée Emma is wrong for him, and that his dream girl Becky has been right in front of him the whole time. With both the announcement of Rosario Dawson's return as Becky in Clerks III, it was easy to assume that they were still on the road to living happily ever after. However, the audience is thrown a devastating curveball when it's revealed that Becky was actually killed by a drunk driver sometime between the events of Clerks II and Clerks III, while she was pregnant with Dante's child. It turns out that Becky's presence in Clerks III is at times Dante dreaming about her, and other times her literally speaking to him from the afterlife, encouraging him to stop being sad about losing her and start learning to be happy without her.
So live while you can. Love while you can.
Vin Diesel may be most famous nowadays for his many appearances in the Fast and Furious movies, but Dominic Toretto isn't his only death-defying action hero. In Triple X, Diesel's Xander Cage is an adrenaline junkie who's been recruited by the US government to prevent a terrorist attack. Triple X was a surprise hit, earning over $250 million at the box office. Naturally, the studio wanted to crank out a sequel, and they weren't going to let anything stop them, not even the loss of Xander himself. After Diesel turned down the chance to reprise his role, production went full steam ahead with Ice Cube in his place. Despite being directed by Lee Tamahori of Die Another Day fame, Triple X State of the Union was a flop. Fans didn't want Darius Stone, they wanted Xander Cage. But State of the Union reveals that Diesel's athlete turned agent apparently died in Bora Bora. After State of the Union bombed, the Triple X series was put on ice. Over a decade later though, Diesel and action thriller veteran DJ Caruso collaborated on a third entry in the franchise in 2017, the aptly named Triple X Return of Xander Cage. Without any explanation for his resurrection, Xander was back in action with his biggest adventure yet. The flick garnered mixed reviews from critics. But for the fans who had been waiting 15 years to see Diesel's homecoming as the monotone super spy, it proved to be incredibly satisfying. Casual viewers probably remember the original Halloween as a showdown between Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. But true fans know that the real protagonist and lead character of the first film was actually Dr. Samuel Loomis. Dr. Loomis is Myers' psychiatrist turned primary pursuer, and actor Donald Pleasance received top billing for his efforts. His legacy among horror fans is strong, even if he often takes a backseat to Jamie Lee Curtis.
Death has come to your little town, Sheriff. You can either ignore it, or you can help me to stop it.
Considering that Loomis lived on after the death of Donald Pleasance via different actors, there was more than enough room for the good doctor's return in the 2018 Halloween reboot. However, considering that the 2018 movie takes place 40 years after the original, Dr. Loomis would be somewhere around 90 years old. So the choice was made to have the character die off screen, replaced by a new psychiatrist who studied under Loomis's tutelage. It's never revealed what his cause of death was, but considering his age, it's likely that no foul play was involved. The Terminator was one of the most exciting films to come out of the 1980s, instantly cementing the name Sarah Connor in the who's who of American pop culture. Terminator 2: Judgment Day upped the ante in terms of character development, transforming Linda Hamilton's character into a gun-toting badass dedicated to preparing her son John for his future as the human resistance leader against the evil Skynet. T2 wound up earning a number of Academy Awards for its technical achievement and found immediate critical and commercial success. So when Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines finally emerged from development hell in 2003, longtime fans expected their favorite waitress turned warrior to blast onto the screen with guns ablazing. But she never showed. Instead, the movie reveals that Sarah Connor died of leukemia between the second and third films. It was Hamilton's choice to leave the franchise, as she claimed that her character arc in T3 would have been insignificant compared to the first two films. She told MTV in 2009. She died halfway through, and there was no time to mourn her. It was kinda disposable, so I said, no thank you. Hamilton returned to the franchise for the first time since 1991 for Terminator Dark Fate, but even the resurrection of Sarah Connor through fourth-dimensional shenanigans couldn't stop it from being one of the biggest box office bombs of that year.
I'll be back.
The Coen brothers are the kings of subverting tropes and toying with audience expectations. No Country for Old Men, the neo-Western thriller based on Cormac McCarthy's novel of the same name, is perhaps their most critically acclaimed thriller among a filmography full of genre-bending modern classics. It's also their most blatantly nihilistic, with a depiction of a bleak, bloody Texas in which the film's protagonist, Llewelyn Moss, is killed off-screen. One fateful day, Moss goes out hunting, but instead of pronghorns, he finds 2.4 million big ones along with a handful of dead gangsters. Moss takes the money and runs, but psychopathic hitman Anton Chigurh, who's tasked with reclaiming the cash, tracks our hero from motel to hotel until poor Llewelyn meets his maker. There's also a complex plot involving a bounty hunter played by Woody Harrelson and a trail of bodies unlucky enough to find themselves on the business end of Chigurh's captive bolt pistol. But at its core, No Country for Old Men is a bloody game of cat and mouse between Chigurh and Moss that ends with Moss eating a bag of bullets courtesy of the Mexican mob. However, instead of a first-hand account of the carnage, we only get a brief glimpse of the aftermath through Sheriff Bell's eyes, just before he eats his first post-retirement breakfast. Cinna was a fan-favorite character in both the Hunger Games books and movies, responsible for giving Katniss her various Capitol-approved makeovers. Musician Lenny Kravitz took on the part when the series came to the big screen, and he proved to be just as capable an actor as he is a singer.
I'm not allowed to bet, but if I could, I'd bet on you.
Cinna is one of Katniss's only true supporters once she's been whisked away from her District 12 home, even though he knows he's literally risking his life to be her friend. In fact, their bond is used as psychological warfare against Katniss when she's forced to watch Cinna be brutally beaten just moments before having to begin her second battle royale. Katniss knows that the Capitol probably isn't done punishing him for being kind to her, and sure enough, Effie Trinket later breaks the news to Katniss that Cinna has been killed. Even in a film series where off-screen deaths are the norm and happen often, Cinna's demise is the most heartbreaking of all. It's not very common to see a major studio movie starring gay characters nowadays, but it was almost unheard of prior to 2005. That was the year that Ang Lee's devastating love story Brokeback Mountain was released to the public, bringing in 8 Academy Award nominations and serious cash at the box office. Centering around the fearless performances of Jake Gyllenhaal as Jack Twist and the late Heath Ledger as Innes Del Mar, Brokeback Mountain follows 2 cowboys who began a passionate love affair kept secret from the rest of the world for decades. Naturally, having to live a lie for that long eats away at both of them and causes major turmoil within each of their respective lives, as they deceive their friends, family, wives, and children. Any chance that they might have had to be together for real is dashed when Innes learns of Jack's death, allegedly from an accident involving an exploding car tire. Innes imagines that Jack was probably beaten to death by Biggie, which is shown on screen, but the movie doesn't explicitly state that this is what actually happened, only that it's Innes' worst-case scenario. The truth of Jack's passing is never fully revealed. He may not be as well known as the more famous members of the Corleone family, but Peter Clemenza has one of the most memorable and funniest lines in The Godfather.
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
Played by Richard Castellano, Clemenza is a fiercely loyal capo who plays an important role in Michael Corleone's rise to power. Despite being a prominent character in the film, he didn't return for The Godfather Part 2. except through flashbacks to his younger self, played by actor Bruno Kirby. Instead, he is said to have succumbed to a heart attack at some point between the timeline of the two films, although there is some skepticism from some of the other characters as to whether he died of natural causes or was murdered. Either way, the reason Peter went from major character to off-screen death was a result of creative differences between Richard Castellano and Godfather director Francis Ford Coppola. This ultimately led Castellano to quit the franchise and soon after, acting altogether. After the events of Aliens, Ellen Ripley finds herself with a potential new love interest and a surrogate daughter in Corporal Hicks and Little Newt respectively. After surviving the Xenomorph Queen's assault, the three, along with the badly damaged android Bishop, enter hypersleep in preparation to return to Earth. Except, much like in most Alien movies, things don't go according to plan. James Cameron's Aliens may end on an optimistic note, but Alien 3 is David Fincher territory, and if you've seen Zodiac or Seven, you may know where this is going. Due to an alien face hugger hidden on the ship, the 4 survivors are launched onto the surface of a prison planet. Newt drowns inside of her escape pod, and Hicks, well, there's not much left of Hicks after his pod is impaled by a support beam. Incredibly brutal and profoundly depressing, the instant collapse of Ripley's newfound family was viewers' first indication that this wasn't the same kind of film as Aliens. Sure, Alien 3 wasn't a particularly great film, as Fincher himself has admitted, but it returned the series to its horror roots with gusto. The Coen brothers may be known for their subversions of popular genres, but their 2010 remake of True Grit is a straight-up no-frills traditional Western. Still, it manages to be impressively heartwarming and surprisingly funny thanks to the powerhouse performances from Jeff Bridges and Haley Steinfeld, the latter of whom was just 13 years old during production. Their characters, Rooster Cogburn and Maddie Ross, don't quite get along at first, but they develop a strong connection as they attempt to track down a murderous outlaw.
I'm a foolish old man who's been drawn into a wild goose chase by a harpy in trousers and a nincompoop.
The chemistry of the unlikely pair is natural and entertaining, and it's thanks to their bond that they're able to make it back home with their lives. After that, they don't see each other for 25 years. But a grown-up Maddie decides to change that after she receives a flyer for his Wild West show. She's tragically late, however, as she learns that he passed away just 3 days prior to her arrival. Even though the two never get their joyful reunion, Maddie is content to reminisce about the difficult but memorable time they spent together.